I know exactly what the moment felt like when I saw it. Not rage, not tears, just this hollow, ringing silence in my chest. The kind you get when something confirms what you'd been trying not to believe for years. The number on the paper was $75. $75 per month. After 14 years, my manager. I'll call him my new manager, because that's exactly what he was. Someone brought in 6 months ago from outside who'd never once asked how anything actually worked, slid the form across the desk like he was doing me a favor. He had this expression on his face, somewhere between bored and satisfied, like he'd already moved on to the next item on his agenda. Standard adjustment for your band, he said. Take it or leave it. I didn't say anything right away. I looked at the form. I looked at the number. I thought about the night 3 years ago when the company's entire client database corrupted 4 hours before a federal compliance deadline, and I sat in the server room alone until 2 a.m. rebuilding the index structure from audit logs because no one else knew how. I thought about the vendor contracts I'd renegotiated every year, the ones that saved the company somewhere around $340,000 annually on infrastructure licensing. I thought about the Monday mornings I came in early specifically so that the operations team would have clean data to start their week. Then I thought about the fact that this man had been here 6 months and had already reorganized 3 departments without understanding what any of them actually did. I have a question, I said. Is this negotiable? He leaned back in his chair. We don't really negotiate band adjustments. I'm not asking about bands. I'm asking if $75 reflects what this role contributes. Something shifted in his face. Not embarrassment, he wasn't capable of that, I'd learn. More like mild irritation, the way someone looks when a vending machine takes longer than expected. If you're unhappy with compensation, he said, I can loop in HR. Please do, I said. He did, and 2 weeks later, HR told me my position was being eliminated as part of a structural realignment. They gave me a folder with COBR information, a severance agreement for 8 weeks, and a form to return my badge. I signed the severance. I returned the badge. I packed my desk plant, a small pothos I'd had for 11 years, into a cardboard box, and I walked out of Caldwell Harty Logistics on a Thursday afternoon in October without saying goodbye to anyone except the woman at the front desk who had been there almost as long as I had. Her name was Nadine. She hugged me. She looked like she was going to cry. I told her I'd be fine. Here's what you need to understand about what I did at Caldwell Harty and why it mattered more than anyone realized until it was gone. Caldwell Harty was a regional logistics and supply chain management firm, mid-sized, privately held, about $180 million in annual contracts, with clients ranging from medical device manufacturers to federal government procurement offices. Not a household name. The kind of company that keeps the country running without anyone noticing. I had joined straight out of graduate school as a junior data analyst. Over 14 years, I had become the person who managed, maintained, and in many cases single-handedly designed the data infrastructure that the entire operation ran on, the vendor relationships, the compliance documentation, the custom reporting system I'd built for the federal contracts, the one that nobody else knew how to touch because I'd built it iteratively over 6 years based on regulatory requirements that changed constantly. My title was Senior Data Operations Manager. My actual function was closer to load-bearing wall when the new management team came in. A consulting firm hired by the board to streamline operations. They looked at the org chart and saw a woman who had been in the same title for 4 years with a salary that had grown to what they called legacy bloat. They didn't see the 14 years of institutional knowledge. They saw a line item. My new manager's name was Derek. He had an MBA from a school I won't name, a very confident handshake, and absolutely no idea what a data pipeline was. I want to be honest about what happened after I left, because I know how these stories can go. People want to believe it was calculated, that I laid some kind of trap, that I walked out the door with a plan already forming. I didn't. What I had was a contract. Not my employment contract. That was standard, and I'd signed it years ago without thinking much about it. I'm talking about the vendor contracts I managed. Specifically, the contract with Viridian Solutions, the company that provided the compliance reporting software used by Caldwell Harter for every one of its federal procurement clients. The Viridian contract was up for renewal the month before I was terminated. I had been mid-negotiation. Derek had asked me to wrap it up before the end of the quarter, and I had been working on revised terms that would have locked in a pricing structure favorable to Caldwell Hart for 3 years. When I was let go, that negotiation stopped, because I was the only person at the company who had a relationship with the Viridian account team. I was the only one who knew we were at the table. I was the only one who knew the current contract had a clause I'd included years ago when I first negotiated it, that required 45 days written notice before renewal, or the licensing structure defaulted to the vendor's standard rates. Standard rates that were, for a company of Caldwell Harty's size, approximately 340% higher than what we were paying. The current contract expired on November 30th. I had been terminated October 12th. Nobody called me about it. I assumed Derek looked at the vendor folder, saw that the contract ran through November, and thought there was plenty of time. There was not plenty of time. There was never plenty of time. That was the entire reason I managed it the way I did. I found out what was happening gradually, the way you find out about things when you're no longer inside the building, but you still have friends who are. Nadine texted me the first week of November. She said things felt strange, that Derek had been in a lot of closed-door meetings, that one of the federal compliance reports had come back flagged for a formatting error that nobody could explain or fix. I knew exactly what the formatting error was. The Viridian system had updated its output schema in October, a minor version change that required a configuration adjustment in our internal reporting layer. I had been planning to do it the week after I was let go. I texted back that I hoped everything was okay. I meant it. I wasn't rooting for chaos. I just wasn't available to prevent it anymore. The second week of November, an analyst named, I'll call him the junior analyst because he was sweet and genuinely trying, reached out to me on LinkedIn. He said he was having trouble with the federal reporting dashboard. Could I help? He'd been assigned to take over my responsibilities. He'd been with the company for 8 months. He was 24 years old. Derek had assigned him to take over my responsibilities. I replied gently that I wasn't able to provide consulting services without a formal agreement. I wished him luck. The third week of November, I got an email from Derek. He wanted to reconnect. He said Caldwell Harter was experiencing some operational transitions and was exploring whether there might be a short-term engagement opportunity. He used the word opportunity 3 times in 4 sentences. I read it. I waited 48 hours. Then I replied that I was open to discussing a consulting arrangement and attached my consulting rate sheet. My rate was $400 an hour, with a minimum engagement of 20 hours per week, billed in advance. He did not respond immediately. What happened between the third week of November and November 30th? I know partly from what came out later and partly from what Nadine and others told me. The Viridian contract defaulted. Because nobody at Caldwell Harty had submitted the renewal notice within the 45-day window, the contract lapsed into what Viridian called a standard service agreement, effectively a month-to-month arrangement at full rack rates. For a company processing the volume of compliance reports Caldwell Harty processed, this meant an immediate increase in licensing costs of approximately $28,000 per month. But that wasn't the crisis. The crisis was the federal contracts. 3 of Caldwell Harty's largest federal clients, procurement offices that together represented about $47 million in annual contract value, required quarterly compliance reports formatted to specific federal standards. Caldwell Harty used the Viridian system to generate those reports. When the contract transitioned to the standard agreement, 2 things happened simultaneously. The system access was throttled to basic tier, and the configuration error I'd been planning to fix propagated through 4 months of queued reports. The reports were wrong. Not wrong in a way that looked wrong in a way that would only be caught during a federal audit. The kind of audit that 3 of those clients had scheduled for the second week of December. I know this because one of the federal contracting officers, a woman I had spoken to quarterly for 6 years, called me directly on her cell phone on November 28th. I'm calling you personally, she said, because your name is still the point of contact on file. Are you still with Caldwell Harte? I'm not, I said. I was let go in October. A pause. Then, do they know what's coming? I don't work there anymore, I said. Another pause. I'm going to have to log this call. I understand, I said. Derek called me on November 29th at 7:14 in the morning. He didn't begin with pleasantries. He said they had a situation. He said it was urgent. He said they needed my help. I asked him what kind of situation. He described it. The Viridian contract. The compliance reports. The audits. He used the phrase significant exposure, and his voice had a quality I hadn't heard from him before, something thinner with less air behind it. I understand, I said. I'd be happy to help. Let me send over a consulting agreement. What are your rates again? $400 an hour, 20-hour weekly minimum, billed in advance? Silence. That seems steep for a short engagement. Derek, I said, and I kept my voice completely even. You have federal audits in 13 days and compliance reports that are currently incorrect. I'm the only person who knows this system well enough to fix it in that time frame. This isn't steep. This is the market rate for the situation you're in. He said he'd have to discuss it with leadership. He called back in 4 hours. They agreed to the terms. I received the wire transfer that afternoon. I want to be very clear about what I did and what I didn't do. I didn't hide anything. I didn't take anything when I left. I didn't deliberately introduce errors or set any kind of time bomb. Everything that broke was the natural consequence of removing the person who had maintained it, combined with the natural consequence of ignoring a contractual deadline that I had managed personally for years. I fixed everything. It took me 11 days, working mostly remotely, with 2 on-site sessions. I corrected the Viridian configuration. I rebuilt the reporting templates. I prepared documentation, actual, complete documentation for the first time, because now I had an hourly incentive to do so. I drafted the communications to the federal contracting officers. I prepared the materials for the audits. The audits passed. The total cost to Caldwell Harte for my consulting engagement was $88,000. The increased Viridian licensing cost for the months they were on standard rates before renegotiating was an additional $56,000. The internal scramble, the overtime, the emergency IT calls, the legal review. I don't know the exact number, but Nadine told me later it was significant. The $47 million in federal contracts was retained. The founder and CEO of Caldwell Harte was a man who had built the company from nothing in the early 1990s. He was mostly hands-off by the time any of this happened. He'd brought in the consulting firm precisely because he wanted to focus less on operations. He traveled a lot. He was in Portugal for most of November. He came back the first week of December while I was still mid-engagement. I heard about the conversation he had with Derek secondhand, from Nadine, from the junior analyst, from 2 other people who had been at the company long enough to understand context. From what I gathered, it lasted about 45 minutes and was very quiet. At some point during that conversation, the founder apparently asked Derek to pull up the personnel file on the consultant they'd brought in to fix the compliance crisis. Derek did. The founder looked at my name. He looked at my 14 years of employment history. He looked at the termination date. He looked at the reason, structural realignment. He asked Derek to explain what role I had held. Derek explained. The founder was quiet for what multiple people described to me as a very long time. Then he said, apparently, who authorized this? Derek said he had in coordination with HR. Another long silence. Then the founder asked a question that I think about sometimes. Not because it was dramatic. It wasn't. Apparently, he said it very quietly, but because of how simple it was. Did anyone talk to her first, before the decision? Derek said there had been a performance review process. That's not what I asked, the founder said. 3 days after that conversation, I received a call from the founder's executive assistant asking if I would be willing to meet with him directly. I said yes. We met at a coffee shop near the office. His idea, I think, because he didn't want it to feel like a summons. He was in his late 60s, a big man with a handshake that meant something, and he looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with jet lag. He apologized, not in a corporate way, not with "we regret that the situation" language. He said, "I'm sorry. You deserved better than that and I wasn't paying attention." I thanked him. I told him I meant it. He asked if I would be willing to return in a restructured role with compensation that reflected the actual function. He named a number. It was a real number, not $75 a month, not a band adjustment. A real number with a title that matched. I thought about it. I genuinely thought about it. Then I told him I appreciated the offer, but I'd spent the past 2 months building something of my own. A small consultancy. 2 clients already. I had realized working from my home office with my coffee, made the way I like it, and no Derek at the end of the hall, that I had been undervaluing myself not just in the sense of salary, but in the sense of time and autonomy and the basic dignity of deciding how my expertise was used. He nodded. He didn't push. He did ask if I would be available for ongoing consulting at agreed-upon rates. I said I could put together a proposal. Caldwell Hart is now one of my 4 retained clients. The arrangement is formal, with scope and rates and a contract that I drafted. Derek is no longer with the company. I don't know the details of that, and I don't need to. I've thought a lot about what I would tell someone who's where I was in October. Sitting across from a person who doesn't understand what they're about to do, holding a piece of paper with a number on it that tells you exactly how little you've been seen. Here's what I'd say: document everything. Not for revenge, for accuracy. Know what you do. Know what it costs to replace you. Know which contracts are expiring and when. Know which vendor relationships exist because of you personally, and which ones will go sideways the moment you're not there to maintain them. Not because you're planning to leave. Because that knowledge belongs to you. It's the accumulated product of your time and your expertise and your judgment, and nobody can take it when you walk out the door. The $75 raise wasn't what hurt. What hurt was being looked at and not seen. Being reduced to a line item by someone who'd been there 6 months and couldn't have told you the difference between a data pipeline and a garden hose. But here's the thing I've made peace with. They weren't able to see me because I had made myself invisible. I was so good at preventing problems that there were no problems to point to. No fires, no outages, no audit failures. Everything just worked. Quietly, consistently, invisibly. It took losing me for the problems to become visible. And at that point, they were very, very visible. I don't know if that's a lesson or just an observation. Maybe both. The pothos is doing beautifully, by the way. I moved it to a spot by the window in my home office. It's put out 6 new leaves since October. I think about that sometimes when I'm on a call with a client. How things grow better when they're in the right conditions. I just needed to find mine. I've had a lot of time to think about what actually happened. Not the dramatic version, not the version where I'm the hero who planned everything. The quiet, honest version. The truth is, I didn't do anything to them. I just stopped doing everything for them. And it turned out those 2 things, in the end, looked almost identical from the outside. That's the part that stays with me. For 14 years, my value was measured in the absence of problems. No audit failures, no contract lapses, no vendor crises. Everything ran so smoothly for so long that the people who arrived late to the story, people like Derek, looked around and genuinely could not see what was being held together. They saw a calm surface and assumed the water was shallow. They had no idea what was underneath or who had been swimming down there keeping it that way. I think about Derek sometimes. Not with anger. I moved past that faster than I expected, but with something closer to pity actually. Because he walked into that building carrying all that confidence, all those frameworks and MBAs speak and structural realignment language, and he genuinely believed that made him equipped to know what he didn't know. That's a dangerous kind of blindness. Not malicious, just incomplete. And incompleteness at that level, in that role, has consequences that fall on everyone around you. What I've come to understand is that every action has a weight to it that doesn't disappear just because you stop paying attention to it. Derek signed my termination paperwork and moved on to his next agenda item. But the weight of that decision didn't go anywhere. It sat in the Viridian contract deadline. It sat in the unread vendor folders. It sat in the compliance reports quietly accumulating errors. He just didn't know he was carrying it, because I had always been the one managing the load before he arrived. That's what I mean when I say this wasn't revenge. Revenge requires intention. What happened was just gravity. Things fall when you remove what holds them up. That's not strategy. That's physics. What I'm most grateful for, looking back, is that the whole thing forced me to answer a question I'd been avoiding for years. What is my work actually worth? Not what HR says, not what a salary band says. What does the market say when the alternative is $47 million in federal contracts at risk? Turns out the market is very clear when the stakes are real enough. Nadine texted me last month. She said the office feels different now. Better, she thinks. I told her I was glad. I meant it completely. The founder and I have a good working relationship now, cleaner than anything I had as an employee, honestly, because the terms are explicit and mutual. He knows what he's paying for. I know what I'm delivering. Nobody has to guess. And the pothos is still growing. 6 new leaves since October, now pushing toward 8. I think that's the thing I'd want someone in my position to hear if they're sitting across from their own Derek right now, holding their own piece of paper with their own insulting number on it. The conditions were wrong, not you. When you find the right conditions, the ones where your expertise is actually visible, where the terms are honest, where the work is valued before a crisis forces the valuation, things grow. Quietly, consistently, in the direction of the light. You just have to be willing to pick up your plant and walk out the door first.